Hello friends, host Eric here on our way to Salt Lake City. We are past Vegas. We went there, we got some beverages, we got some orange juice, other things like that. And we went pee, we got gas, and we're resuming our trip to Utah. Now, somebody pointed out, Abraham I think was pointing out, we've got quite the crazy car here. We've got ENTP, ENTP. Justin is, I think he's an ENTP. At one point I said he was ENFP. I'm not sure, but I think he's ENTP. I'm pretty sure he is. I based that previous diagnosis on one answer to one question that is not adequate. I think he's ENTP. He's a really strong debater and intuitive with the logical arguments rather than with human impacts. Regardless, that's, I mean, you know, those things aren't really reasons to do things or not, you know? Okay, so we got probably 4 ENTPs, but regardless, 4 any dumbs in here. Then we got Kunkel, ENTJ, TE dumb. And then we got Abraham, who was going into FE diabetic shock. Because he was just so much extroverted intuition being thrown on this bus. My kid Felix here, he, like me, is never at a loss for something to say.
Problem is getting me to shut up.
Yeah, well, we make these little videos forever, as we were saying when we got out of the car. And we would just continue forever until we both got physically exhausted and fell asleep. And there was no reason to stop, you know? So, what's cool, interesting, you didn't graduate from high school, just like Zachary didn't graduate from high school.
Trip out. I didn't know that. Maybe that's why I thought he was such a cool dude.
He is cool. Well, also because he's INTP. We're a good match for INTP. And where, like, why? Explain that to me. What made you not finish school?
Okay. Well, from a very early age, I was fairly advanced, you could say. I was asking questions way above my teacher's pay grades, and a lot of the responses which I received were not inclusive. They made me feel like the questions I was asking were not only irrelevant, but intrinsically wrong. Like, more than just factually, but like as a person, me asking this was either disrespectful or like any negative implication you could think of. So as I grew, this hostility toward the status quo in K through 12 education in America only enforced this idea that academia was inherently hostile to myself, and I could not find a home. I could never be whole within this system.
I think Abraham's telling you, Abraham, are you trying to get him to be quiet or what?
The same way, Felix.
What?
Bernie was the same way.
Okay. What? Bernie was the same way.
Bernie.
Oh, Bernie? Fernando.
Oh, Fernando.
My cousin.
He was the same way in what regard? He didn't like school either, or what?
I'm okay.
I never said I didn't like school.
I didn't say that. I was saying what was he saying?
Oh, okay.
I know Fernando, and he had a very different school experience than you did. He manifested both as not enjoying it, or somehow wanting to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It was for very different reasons, I would conclude. But anyway, proceed.
So this mistrust and hostility toward the academic system basically led me to not only confront the majority of my teachers, but actively seek to derail their interpretation of the lessons. And I was always met with one of 2 responses. I can say legitimately that 3 of my teachers in K through 12 fostered my intellectual growth as a person, whereas the vast majority of them, everybody else, stifled and actively tried to
Shut you down.
Yeah, and shut me up and not talk about what I thought needed to be said. And as a result, I never gave much credence to the majority of teachers. So what I was left with was a huge, like, bifurcation in my grades. I had A pluses in my AP courses, and then I had Fs in my science course because I disliked the model that the teacher was using. And it was like, now that I look back at it, it's quite ridiculous, because if I did think of myself as academically superior at the time, it's like it's like arguing with a child. Like, when a child gives you a candy phone, you don't tell the child, put down the candy phone, there's nobody on there. You take the damn candy phone and you indulge the child. That's your job. And
you say, hello.
Exactly.
Oh my God, you've mastered the ability to send your voice through candy.
Exactly.
Thank God, because these electrical wires are too much of a hassle.
And I didn't realize that at that time, or didn't understand that, or didn't discover that, however you want to phrase it. And as a result, I didn't have the necessary credits to graduate from high school. At one point, I was even classified as a student in danger of severe societal ills. I was put into a specific course with what one could call an unsavory group. It was not out of the ordinary for the class to divulge into a fist fight where weapons were pulled, and security having to come in and escort everybody out. It was also not foreign for somebody to just get up and say, I'll be back, and just leaving and doing as they wished and returning in whatever state they may, be it drunk or high or whatever. And I didn't feel that I had to be there for any reason other than as some sort of academic political prisoner. I was being forced into an atmosphere which I hated, because I couldn't speak my mind because nobody knew what the fuck I was saying, because I was telling teachers, you're using a problematic paradigm. And teachers would say, what the fuck is a paradigm? And I would go off on them. And it got me into a lot of after-school meetings. And as a result, it only further entrenched my distrust and hostility toward the educational system. And I didn't find a consistent home for education until I found higher learning, because I found places where I could express myself in a safe manner.
You found debate. Forget the rest of college. You didn't find shit in the rest of college. You only found debate.
I found calm. I like calm because it entails debate.
Yeah, Felix. Woo.
And like, it's a really
What kind
weird
of shit we gotta put up with? We're just having a regular old conversation here. He's just talking. But we do it. We're just talker. By the time he takes a breath, we're like, wow, this is that speech up there. And they want to tease us. They want to tease us for our awesomeness. Well, listen, non-ENTPs, namely Abraham and Kunkel.
Make America theory again.
Yeah, make America theory.
I don't know what he said.
I like that as a campaign slogan. Make America theory again.
Feel the Felix. Make America theory again.
When was it ever theory? Like,
way back before time began. In the way back
Revolutionary War was all theory, dude. The Enlightenment.
dude,
Everything.
all right. So, do we continue with this line of conversation for talking with famous
actually,
people?
let's talk about this line of conversation.
Okay.
How we can make America less concrete.
And more theory-based?
I'm not talking about the people. I'm talking about the idea of America itself. Make it more theoretically robust.
That good?
That's fine.
I guess we could stop, like, BSing and beating around the bush when it comes to enforcing our Bill of Rights. Like,
nice.
Ground our, like, policy endeavors in upholding fundamental rights, and that could make us more, like, foundationally sound as far as political theory. Like, if it's really a social contract, then the people are engaging in this contract for specific benefits. And should the state fail to uphold these benefits, we should have the right to nullify this contract by whatever means we see fit.
It's obviously not a contract because I never signed it. You can't have a non-voluntary contract.
Okay. I guess my
It's definitionally contradictory to have a non-voluntary contract.
Well, I guess the way that I see your signing the contract is choosing to live under the protection of the United States federal government.
No, I was born under this protection in this situation. I did not choose it at all. So
you have the right.
They can't claim that I entered into some sort of contract because I chose to be born here, right?
I do agree that you have no choice in where you are born. However, I do believe you have a choice in where you live.
Okay, but listen, that places the burden on the wrong side, doesn't it? It does place the burden on the wrong side because I'm here, I'm born here, and you're saying you have to move to avoid my bullshit.
I would not argue that I'm making bullshit laws. I would not make bullshit laws.
Right, I know, but look. Okay, so then you're right, but the point is, it's just not the social contract is just nonsense. It says the government acts as though you were a signatory to a social contract.
Uh-huh.
Oh my God.
I agree, it does.
Uh-huh.
But guess what?
You didn't sign the contract?
I'm not a signatory to a social contract. Your metaphor is not even an analogy, it's just a metaphor.
Well, like, I guess that the way I look at that argument is the same way I look at the guy who sued the government over trying to tax him because he never signed the Constitution. Like, I don't think you have to have signed the Constitution to get in on the, like, social contract theory.
But, hey, no, I disagree with you because, look, you don't need social contract theory to justify it, and there are alternate ways to justify it, and there's no reason to prefer social contract theory over anything else. It's nothing more than just a random metaphor.
Well, the reason that I prefer social contract theory is because it gives me the right as a citizen to say, screw the centralized authority, it's time for a revolution.
But see, here's the thing. It denies the real mechanism by which we should hold them accountable, which is we need to hold each individual accountable. The reason the government is so resistant to fixing is that it successfully diffuses responsibility so that no individual within the government can be responsible.
It's a conglomerate.
We need to make each individual member of the government accountable individually so that every person when they go to the DMV needs to shame the DMV employee.
I think there is an easier method to decreasing diffuse responsibility.
What's that?
Decrease the number of people with responsibility.
Well, sure. Cut the government is fine. That's
not cut government. Make one person in charge. That way they're ultimately responsible for every shitty decision. And that greatly increases the possibility that shitty governors will get ousted.
When you get deputized, people deputize other people. The thing is, that's the way the harm gets diffused out, is that you don't do all of one thing. So the decision maker will still cause the same thing to occur. What you need instead is the ability to say, the habits, it's not even an ability. We need the habits of holding everybody who works for the government accountable for their plunder.
I could agree with that.
And saying, so when you go to the DMV, it's not just business as usual. That's why it continues. It's business as usual. If every day 10, 20 people went and did what I did, go in there with the camera and say, instead of saying like, oh, I'm here to pay my registration, you say, I don't want your product, why are you trying to force me to buy it at gunpoint? And then if every day dozens of people did that at every DMV, made a big fuss, and made it slow the fucking thing down, gummed up the system, people start to think about the actual arguments instead of just reacting to the, and it happens, we've seen plenty of examples of it over time. When an argument wins, it's because it gets repeated often enough and wins enough individual battles that people don't really try to fight it anymore.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. When I think of that interpretation, I think it gives society too much credit. I generally think of society as a whole as a group of irrational, panicky animals.
See, that's the problem. We shouldn't be thinking of society as a whole. This vision that we all have of the mob that needs to be constrained. The core point is this. Is that you're talking about? Are you the mob?
Honestly, I think if there were a riot, I would probably be out there looting with everybody else. If not actively defending myself via violent force.
Now, as it needs to be, you were the first person ever correctly answer that question tactically. You don't say what everybody else says. You don't say, no, I'm not part of that group, or I don't need to be protected against, even though he believes that. Because, of course you believe that. Well, you do not need the government to oppress you, keep you like...
The reason that I believe that is because I heard somebody say that a nihilist would never die for their beliefs because they might be wrong. That's why I believe I need to be protected against, because I might be wrong.
Well, that's why we need a single algorithm that actually is consistent and works. The only algorithm that doesn't contradict itself, that doesn't produce situations where two values are in conflict and you have to prioritize one or the other, and that's the negative rights framework. And so your social contract theory negates the negative rights framework, so it must be wrong.
See, like, the only way I can see it right now is violating the negative rights framework is if we believe that I don't personally reap any benefits from subscribing to the personal, like the social contract. Like, I am only being forced with unjust taxation for unfair recompense. Like, I am not receiving due compensation. And I agree with that. Like, our government is really shitty at doing that. Like, when
That's not why.
You don't think that, what's it called, eminent domain doesn't actually give you what your property is worth? It just gives whatever the government wants to give?
No, I think it does. And I think that in that instance, you have a legitimate claim for the government to do that. There are specific... I don't want to quibble over the specifics. I do agree that eminent domain in certain circumstances is legitimate. If I have a house that... If I want to build my house right in the middle of a mountain pass, and it causes everybody else to go around the mountain, fuck no, you know? That's not cool. But the thing is, yeah, government has some claim to certain duties. The funding mechanism for those duties ought not be accepted as a default kind of taxation we have now. There's a lot of kinds of ways to fund things that aren't unjust taxation. That's what we have now. If we have a progressive tax, we know automatically that every dollar you spent out of that progressive tax is plunder, because it violates the core number one rule that all economic theorists left and right agree on: equal work for equal pay. It violates it.
Because the government is taking money for no real work.
If I work for 40 hours, I need the extra money. You work for 20 because you can get by on 20. They shouldn't take some of my money and give it to you. You've chosen 20. It denies the individual the right to choose a minimalist life, this low income earning, but low demands, and to work less hours, and to be treated the same as everybody else. It denies you that right of dignity, even if you are poor. It takes your dignity and says, you don't get to contribute. If these taxations really are contributing to society, you don't get to contribute because you're too poor. And we don't treat you like somebody who can take care of himself. We'll give you free stuff, and then we'll put a bunch of rules. Here's some free housing, and here's a drug test that goes along with it. And then what happens? They try to raise the living wage, and the people cut back on their hours because they want to keep their free stuff.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, because sometimes I do feel that to an extent a citizen with more does have an obligation to a citizen with less, but I don't feel that that obligation should be so sufficient that it destroys that individual's right to, like, a happy life pursuing liberty. Like,
he doesn't have any such obligation, but it would be nice. And if he wants to be a big douchebag, we should all call him a big douchebag. If he's super, super greedy and like doesn't do anything with his money except sit on it and wipe his ass with it, then fine. We can bust his chops, but he has no obligation. That makes no sense. We gotta stop this now because it's about to die. I can tell by the way the camera looks.